be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 25th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. He sighed. When I first saw Harry, while Poppy checked him over after Hagrid retrieved him from the wreckage of the house, I knew his scar contained something. I wasn't sure what at first. Trying to remove or heal it caused him great pain. Poppy and I tried everything we could think of, and failed. Fortunately, his mother's love magic was protecting him, and easily held back whatever was in the scar. I decided to leave it alone while I researched it. Which I have done for 10 years. He turned to his potions professor. Severus, show them, please. Scowling, Severus began pulling up his robe's left arm. Severus was a member of Voldemort's Death Eaters back then. He reformed shortly after Harry's birth, the headmaster explained as the Atlanteans glared at the professor. There, Severus said, there it is, the Dark Mark. The Dark Lord always marked his closest followers. Displayed on his forearm was a grey tattoo of a human skull with a snake coming out of its mouth and forming a figure 8 with the snake's head at the bottom facing out, hissing malevolently. When the Dark Lord first disappeared 10 years ago, it almost faded away, but it remained. A faint, thin darkening of the skin. One could almost hope it would fade away completely, with time. Professor Snape said despondently. It did not. That's why I've been telling everyone that Voldemort isn't dead, merely gone, said Dumbledore to Filius and Minerva. They returned his look with bleak ones of their own. The mark has been slowly getting darker until this summer when it suddenly darkened considerably, continued the portions professor. The Atlanteans all crowded close to look at the dark mark. They looked as if they were puzzled by it. He just gave you this? Asked Applejack suspiciously. It isn't your special talent, asked Rarity. Be a bit of a funny talent, wouldn't it, said Rainbow Dash. Making snakes come out of your mouth, I mean. Pinkie Pie snickered. Maybe he's a cold cuddler. The princess facepalmed and sighed, as the others expressed varying degrees of laughter. Severus scowled. The Dark Lord is not one you can mock in safety. Be careful what you say. Pinkie Pie shrugged and poked at the mark with a finger. Severus pulled his arm back, scowling even more. Yeppers, he's still here, she said. Seems rather careless, though. Doesn't he know you can trace him and all his followers with this? Everyone stared at her. Well, you can. She said, surprised at their surprise. Then she giggled, stepped closer to Severus, and suddenly pressed her whole hand over the mark. Severus yelped and jerked his arm away, cradling it against his chest. What did you do, you silly girl? He demanded, rubbing his arm. She giggled again. He was feeling a little dismayed about today, so I sent him a hello and a little bundle of happiness and joy to brighten his day. I fed it straight to him. I think he was sad to lose his snake friend. They continued to stare at her. The Director General of MI5 sighed as he examined the latest photos from the surveillance in Little Whinging. They showed Princess Luna, surrounded by her much smaller guards, heading back into the forest and, he suspected, to the portal. That she was happy was evident from her broad smile and the obvious bounce in her step. Whatever she had done, it had been quite successful. The guards, of course, had no expressions except watchfulness on their surroundings. What really took his attention, though, was the glowing globe hovering to one side of her as she walked. The close-ups of the globe showed what appeared to be a snake coiled inside. A very unhappy snake from the way he seemed to be hissing and striking at the globe. Sir Walker dropped the photos and tapped his intercom. James. Tell the military to step down. Things appear to be back to normal. Keep the Harriers on station for another 2 hours. If nothing further happens, they can return to base. And ask Castor to stop in, I have some new photos for him to see. He leaned back in his chair. Just what kind of snake would require that a ruler of the nation take part in its acquisition? Or was it containment? Had she been needed to capture it? And why had it been in that trunk? And how had she created that globe, not to mention transporting it when there was nothing visible supporting it? He was missing some important pieces to this puzzle. The equestrians were clearly up to more than just establishing diplomatic relations with England. And with the little technology the equestrians had so willingly given to them, it appeared that what they had released so far, while groundbreaking in many ways, was merely small potatoes, very small potatoes. Just what were the equestrians up to? How far could they trust them? Lunch had been surprisingly good, Harry thought. No doubt due to the house elf in the kitchen, as the barman hadn't moved from behind the bar the entire time. He had used his wand to float their meals to them. Plus, drinks to his other customers, who seemed a bit discomfited by the presence of so many children. Several newcomers had stopped on their way in to step back and take a look at the sign over the door, as if they thought they had entered the wrong building. While the students gathered outside the door after lunch to discuss where they should go next, one of the twins made sure that none of the tables or chairs they had used were still clean. The barman did not seem pleased about that. But, then again, his scowl as the others had left before the twin had started dirtying the tables had been even worse. Maybe his scowl was his normal expression. Now, said the other twin to them, is the time to visit Honeydukes, while everyone else is still either having lunch or waiting to start. He started off, come along, now. They followed, like a gaggle of goslings following a gander. True enough, Harry saw, the lines outside MDM Pudafoots and the 3 Broomsticks were much longer than before. Even some of the homeowners had set up tables outside their doors and were serving a bit of food to hungry students. Honeydukes, by comparison, was merely moderately crowded, with plenty of room for the Gryffindors. It helped that the inside was much bigger than the outside. Which meant, if the other places did the same thing, that the other restaurants were really crowded inside. It appeared some students had decided that Honeydukes qualified as a restaurant and ordered accordingly, as they were seated outside on conjured tables and chairs stuffing themselves on the sweets. The Gryffindors worked their way inside. There were shelves upon shelves of bins holding the most delicious-looking sweets imaginable. Chunks of creamy nougat, pink squares of shimmering coconut ice, and big, honey-colored toffees were right at the door. There were hundreds of different kinds of chocolate in neat rows. There was a large barrel of every flavor beans, and another of fizzing whizbees, the levitating sherbet ball that Ron had mentioned. Another wall was labeled Special Effects Sweets, Drobble's Best Blowing Gum, which filled a room with bluebell-colored bubbles that refused to pop for days, the strange, splintery tooth-flossing string mints, tiny black pepper imps, Breathe Fire for Your Friends, Ice Mice, Hear Your Teeth Chatter and Squeak, peppermint creams shaped like toads, hop realistically in the stomach, fragile sugar-spun quills and exploding bonbons. One glance was all that Harry needed to know where Ron would be spending most his remaining sickle. Harry and the Fillies were impressed. This was a candy shop, not unlike the store in Ponyville run by Bon Bon, but with a much larger variety of candies and flavors. The selection of fudges wasn't nearly as extensive as in Bon Bon's though. He was surprised that the shelves were so full after so many students had been through the shop this morning. Then he overheard Mr. Flume say to his wife, both were looking rather frazzled, give a few galleons to the house elf and have him get us a box each off this list. The man handed her a list as she handed him a box of pepper imps to replace the nearly empty box on the shelf. She hurried into the back room. It was amazing, Harry thought later, how much time you could spend in a candy shop, not to mention money. The twins, oddly enough, were the voices of reason. Don't spend all you nuts here, they said. You'll want to save a few for Zonko's joke shop. If you don't, you'll regret it. And we can always stop in on our way back to the castle later this afternoon. After most of the students had finished stuffing their pockets with sweets to take back to the castle, they headed off to Zonko's. Zonko's was a prankster's paradise. There were exploding quills, after the third word, bang, stacks of exploding snap decks, fake mice, they look and sound real, they even poop chocolate sprinkles, winged catapults, fanged frisbees, ever-bashing boomerangs, screaming yo-yos, dung bombs, stink pellets, BLD quills that wrote in fake BLD, insulting mirrors, chocolate-flavored laxatives, fainting fancies, and much, much more. They even had a fireworks section that took up almost one entire wall by themselves. All in all, it was an easy place in which to spend an hour or so perusing the inventory. Harry made sure to snatch one of the dwindling supply of catalogs at the counter after making a few purchases. Pipsqueak would be thrilled at getting some of the fireworks. Plus, the insulting mirror would be the hit of the school playground. He was sure maybe he could sneak it into the filly's bathroom. The headmaster closed his eyes and thought. When I left Harry with his relatives, he finally said, almost a minute later. The Atlanteans suddenly stiffened. He looked up at Princess Sparkle's suddenly hostile expression. He felt he had better explain. It was the only safe place for him, at the time. His mother's sister provided an anchor for the protection his mother's love gave him. I was able to extend it to the entire household. As long as he lived there, he, and they, were safe from Voldemort's followers, the Death Eaters, as they fashioned themselves, couldn't harm him. As a result, Harry could grow up in a normal household without having to fear that he, and his family, would be attacked at any moment. And Voldemort had followers who I knew, he said gently, would try to find him. Who are, in fact, are still trying. He shook his head sadly. If I hadn't acted as I did, when I did, the Wisengamot would have gotten involved. They would have turned the boy into a political quaffle as the various factions fought over whose home he should go to and gain access to his family's wealth. It is entirely possible he would have been placed with a family that surreptitiously supported Voldemort, and then the boy might have had a regrettable accident one day. Or, just as dangerous, be turned into one of his supporters. He shook his head at the thought. Even if he went to a neutral family, or one of my supporters, that family would have been the target of reprisals from unrepentant Death Eaters. Eventually, they would have succeeded in getting to Harry. He looked steadily at Twilight. They would need to be lucky just once, we would need to be lucky every time. He paused to consider his next words. Placing him with a family outside England was just as problematic. Voldemort's supporters would have easily tracked down my foreign friends and acquaintances. Then tracked down their friends, looking for a toddler with messy black hair who suddenly appeared as a foster child. Or a child with an excessive number of cosmetic charms. His mother's sister was the only real choice. Plus, being Muggles, they would not be able to access and plunder his family's wealth. He sighed tiredly. I did put up spells to monitor the boy's physical and mental health, as Minerva can tell you, but, unfortunately, I made a mistake and the spells failed to work as I had intended. Minerva has always said I should have personally checked on his welfare, but I trusted my spells to keep me apprised. That was a mistake, one I deeply regret. The spells I had so carefully built actually prevented me from noticing the things that would have warned me to take a closer look. He looked into Princess Sparkle's eyes. I shall never forgive myself for that failing, and what it meant to Harry Potter. I don't know how I can redress the grave wrong I have done. But I shall spend the rest of my life trying. Twilight slowly nodded, still unhappy with the situation, but recognizing, he hoped, that he was sincere. He took a deep breath. I knew Voldemort had explored into some very dark magic. He had told his followers he had made himself immortal, that he couldn't die. But I didn't know exactly what he had done. There are many ways to extend one's life, to become, for all intents and purposes, immortal. The Flammels have done so with the Philosopher's Stone. But what had he done? Had he so splintered his soul with casually killing innocents that what had happened to Harry was an accident? Or had he done it deliberately and the ritual had gone wrong? I suspected one path he might have taken, but the evidence was insufficient, and flimsy at best. He looked down at Ravenclaw's circlet. This shows me which path he actually took. Whether Harry's scar was an accident or deliberate we shall probably never know for sure. Although, I think it was accident as there were no signs of any sort of ritual in the nursery where Harry and his deceased mother were found. The headmaster shook his head. We call things that contain pieces of a person's soul, Horcruxes, he said slowly as Severus shook his sleeve back down. Harpo the Foul was the first European to use one, at least that we know of. He shook his head. As long as part of your soul remains on this plane, you cannot pass on to the next great adventure. You can hold off death forever. He looked over at Professor Snape, who was rubbing his arm. Thus, the dark mark has never faded. And the more powerful Voldemort becomes, the darker the mark becomes. He looked back at Princess Sparkle. To cut a piece off of your soul is a great evil, it makes you a bit less than human, a bit less than sane. To do so more than once is unthinkable. He paused. We know 2 fragments of his soul have been released. He took a deep breath. And he has a 3rd piece in himself. So, he has done this once on purpose. At least. He pursed his lips and stroked his beard as he stared up at Twilight. And, then, the question becomes, how? Many times has he done this? Was the fragment in Harry an accident? Or had he already created one and wanted Harry for his second, to make 3? Or was Harry to be the 5th? Or the 7th? Or the 11th? All are magical numbers. Which did he select? Oh, said the princess, he's made 5 on purpose. Counting himself and Harry, that makes 7 pieces. Everyone stared at Twilight. She rolled her eyes. It's obviously a simple geometric progression. They stared at her. She sighed. Harry was the last one he created. Whether on purpose or not doesn't matter. Harry was the last one. The piece I examined was tiny. That alone, of course, doesn't help. If you assume he started with an intact soul, then Harry's piece is the last one in the series. With only 2 data points, however, you cannot draw any conclusions. The tiara, however, gives us a 3rd point. She started pacing. Unfortunately, we don't have an absolute size for the soul, but we can assume that the value of 1 represents an intact soul. Now, I have no experience with soul splitting, and haven't read any books that covered the subject, or even mentioned it. One might assume that the average soul fragment is the size of the one that was in the tiara. However, Harry's was demonstrably smaller, so the tiara size can't be the default. The wizards and witch exchanged puzzled looks. Severus slowly nodded in understanding. And neither can Harry's soul fragment be considered the default fragment size, as then you have to explain why the tiara's fragment was so much larger. So, a simple linear slope describing Voldemort's remaining soul size is contraindicated. Unless he has done this at least 30 times on purpose, if the tiara fragment was his first Horcrux. The wizards and witch looked staggered at that conclusion. Dumbledore cleared his throat and slowly said, creating a Horcrux is supposedly extremely painful. I'm not sure one could remain sane after that much pain. She nodded at him. So, again that is contraindicated as a possible solution. She started pacing again. The next most likely progression is a geometric progression, where each data point is the remaining size of both Voldemort's soul and that Horcrux's soul fragment. Again, assuming that one represents an intact soul, based on the size difference between the tiaras and Harry's soul fragments, we can place Harry's fragment at one position and see if the tiara fragment would fit any of the remaining positions. If we start with 3, the tiara doesn't fit in the second position, it's too small. Moving to 5 similarly leaves no position that would fit the tiara, they are all either too large or too small. However, at 7 pieces, the tiara fits the 3rd position perfectly. Thus, he has split his soul 5 times on purpose, and doing so takes half of his remaining soul each time. Meaning, after including Harry's accidental sixth fragment, that Voldemort has only 1/64th of a soul remaining. They stared at her. She stopped and looked at them a moment before she returned to pacing. Unless the fragments are random in size when the soul is split. In that case, I would expect the ritual used would seize upon the smallest fragment available. That would preclude accidentally sealing the main soul in a Horcrux. In which case, it is impossible to predict where the tiara sits on the slope, and the number of Horcruxes is impossible to determine from the evidence. Nor how big Voldemort's remaining soul is. If the next Horcrux we find doesn't fit any of the available positions in a geometric progression, then the ritual must create random-sized pieces. That means we have no way to determine either how many Horcruxes he has made, or the order in which they were made. Which makes our task significantly more difficult. However, given the relative sizes of the two Horcruxes, the odds that the two soul fragments I have seen would fit a geometric progression, out of a possibly infinite number of permutations of random splits, are so low as to preclude that as a reasonable assumption. Especially given the presumed low number of times that the ritual can be executed without destroying the creator's sanity in its entirety, which would mean he would be incapable of creating more. She shrugged. We need to find another soul fragment and see how big it is. If it fits any of the open slots on the geometric slope, then the geometric progression is confirmed as the most likely solution. If so, then we know that Voldemort has split his soul 6 times, 5 on purpose and 1 on accident, making 6 Horcruxes. Whether Harry was intended to be his 6th Horcrux is unknown, but not likely based on that soul fragment's lack of any protection spells. She nodded her head at Dumbledore, and the lack of any evidence of a ritual at the Potter home. She tilted her head slightly and waited for their reactions. Dumbledore stared at her for several moments, sighed, then shrugged. It will take some time to research and track where Tom Riddle went after he left Hogwarts, and what he might have done. He looked up at the strangled gasp that he heard from Minerva. Oh, yes, that is his name, his original name, before he adopted the moniker Voldemort flees from death in French. Dumbledore shook his head. Tom Riddle was such a promising student. He soaked up knowledge like a sponge, and was powerful beyond his years. His time here at Hogwarts was exemplary. He was at the top of every class. He was made a prefect, then head boy. He graduated with honors and friends in all the houses, although I suspect he considered them as nothing more than tools for his use. He even received an award for special service to the school for catching the instigator of a series of attacks and 1 death. He looked out the windows at the thin trail of smoke still visible in the sky. We now know from the basilisk that was wrong, that the student he accused was innocent. It was quite likely that it was Tom Riddle who released the basilisk all those years ago. He sighed. I suspected that Tom wasn't what he portrayed to the school, but he had several teachers quite enamored of his talent and glib tongue. The headmaster shrugged. But there was a darkness in his soul. I could sense it. And his actions at the orphanage he lived at were telling. Unfortunately, I was merely the Transfiguration professor. Headmaster Dip Pet, and many of the other, more experienced, professors, would have nothing of my suspicions. I could only watch and hope I was wrong. He leaned back in his chair. After Tom graduated, I lost track of him. I'd hear a rumor that he was working here or there, and then all word of him vanished. When I became headmaster, he applied for the job of Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. Dumbledore looked out the window. He left after he was unable to explain why he wanted the position when he clearly had no interest in teaching. Since that interview, Hogwarts has been unable to keep a professor in the position of defense against the dark arts for more than a year. I suspect that he placed a curse on the position after his interview was over and he was leaving the castle, but I have been unable to find its anchor. He shook his head wryly. I checked the classroom, office, and quarters assigned to the defense against the dark arts professor for hidden runes or dark artifacts repeatedly, to no avail. I changed the name of the class to Dark Arts Defense for 3 years, and then to Magical Defense for another 3. I even changed the room's and office to new locations. Nothing worked. He looked at the restored tiara that Phileas held. Perhaps that was the anchor. We shall discover if that is so either this year or next. He sighed and stroked his beard. No matter. He looked the frowning professor. I am afraid we shall have to put that away. We don't want to alert any of Voldemort's followers that we have discovered his secret. Or him, when he does return. He held out his hand, and Phileas, reluctantly, handed him the tiara. Dumbledore opened a drawer in his desk and placed the circlet into it. He closed the drawer and tapped it with his wand. He looked up at them and smiled. There, only I can open that drawer, and it cannot be forced without destroying what is in it. It shall remain our secret until this matter with Tom is resolved. Later, I shall place a Fidelius charm on it and none shall know the tiara's location. They all nodded. I shall begin going through my memories to see what clues I may find there. He looked over at his pensieve, then to his Transfigurations professor. I know how busy you are already, Minerva, but I shall have to depend on you more while I am preoccupied with that. She grimaced. I understand, Albus. Perhaps, suggested Twilight, you could have 3 of your 7th-year students take over teaching one class a week for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd-year students. Or have them check the assignments the children hand in. You could call them professorial assistants. It's what we do at Celestia's School for Gifted Students. The professors looked at her in surprise. An excellent suggestion, the headmaster said. Minerva, do you think you could select your 3 best students? We could offer them an honorarium as an incentive. She frowned thinking, and slowly nodded. Yes, I think that would work. She paused, then added, and we could do the same for the things the house elves find. A bit of challenging extracurriculum work that would look good on their resumes. Anything they can't handle, they can refer to me. Oh, yes, said Phileas, energized at the idea. That would be excellent experience for the 7th years. What about the enchantments on Hogwarts? Queried the princess. And hunting for other objects that shouldn't be here. Dumbledore looked at her. What would you have me do? I can either focus on discovering what Tom has done, or on Hogwarts. Getting the ministry involved would require telling them things we wish to keep secret. He sighed. Plus, having the ministry involved in Hogwarts enchantments would open us to Tom's supporters building holes in the coverage or sabotaging what the others do. She stood quiet for a moment. Would you object to having a few of the professors from Princess Celestia's School for Gifted Students come here to examine the enchantments? Dumbledore managed to conceal his surprise. He stroked his beard, thinking. This would be an unparalleled opportunity to meet the Atlantean experts for an extended time. It wouldn't involve the ministry, which eliminated an entire realm of problems, and allowed the enchantments to be upgraded without taking significant amounts of time away from his other research. That is a most generous offer, Your Highness, he said nodding. When might we expect them? She worried her lower lip with her teeth for a moment. I'll have to get Princesses Celestia and Luna to okay everything and agree on whom to send. She paused, thinking. Possibly by Friday? He nodded. Excellent, that will give us time to prepare rooms and an explanation for the students. And tell the students that you are going to be searching the school for those dark artifacts and that any found will be confiscated and returned to their parents, she added. He stroked his beard for a moment. Yes, that is most definitely an excellent suggestion. He smiled happily. It has been a most enlightening day, Princess Sparkle. I thank you again for your assistance in capturing the basilisk, and, he looked down at the drawer in his desk, for finding Rowena Ravenclaw's lost tiara. He smiled gratefully as she nodded. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss before we all start on other tasks? She blinked and frowned. A scroll flew up from her briefcase and she started running down the list it contained. Check, 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 she mumbled, her quill making the appropriate marks on her scroll. Prince Shining Armor just smirked, and said, "That's my sis," while shaking his head ruefully. Miss Rarity sighed, Applejack rolled her eyes, and Pinkie Pie just giggled and finished putting the last layer of frosting on a cake that was sitting on one of the tables by the couch. Rainbow Dash, still in her Pegasus form, was once more floating near the ceiling and looking out the window. This time she was flying on her back in a position reminiscent of a cat on bed hanging its head off the side. A clearly impossible feat. He shook his head at the sight. She had made it almost to the end as they silently watched when she suddenly stopped. She gritted her teeth, but then continued. Finally, she stopped and looked up. Almost everything scheduled for the day is done. Oddly, she did not look happy about that. The quill was making additional notes on the paper. Yes, he said inquiringly, lifting an eyebrow. Show me where the Cerberus is so I can check the charms. And tell me what he is guarding. Dumbledore sighed. He had hoped she had forgotten that particular item from yesterday. He looked at the three professors, all of whom looked ready to object, and shook his head slightly. They stayed silent. He stood, pushing his chair back. Then we should be off. Fortunately, it is not far from here. He ushered the group down the stairs. A good friend of mine, Nicholas Flamel, he started as he led them to the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side. Spike answered the knock at the castle door. A unicorn mare was standing there. She had a light blue coat and two-tone purple mane and tail. Hi. How can I help you? Hesitantly, she asked, is Princess Twilight Sparkle in? Nope. She's off doing something important. The mare looked crestfallen. Oh. I was hoping she could tell me something about the portal in the Everfree. She worried her lower lip a moment. I was just over there, and the guard said they were hiring. She looked down at the dragon and frowned. I wanted to find out a bit more before I applied. I'm new in town, you see, and I need a job. Shaw, he said, waving a claw, I can answer your questions. He puffed out his chest a bit. I've even went through the portal with Twilight the first time. Really? She said, surprised. You must be very brave to explore a world through a portal. She looked at him in awe. He blushed. I suppose I was, he said. Well, come on in, and I'll tell you all about it. Are you sure that's all right? She glanced at the two guards, one on either side of the castle door. He waved a claw again. It's fine, Tree said they're gonna need a bunch of ponies for the embassy, so it's not like it won't be big news when the word gets out. She walked into the entryway as he shut the door. They went into the kitchen where he fixed them tea. Then he spent the next several hours regaling her with his adventures on the other side. She was especially interested in the wizards and witches he had seen. And how the ponies had paid for everything. The Gryffinder's next stop was Scriven Shafts. While it wasn't nearly as interesting as the other two stores, it did have some really ace items, the self-inking quill that did any color you wanted, ink begone erasers, sucks up ink spills, splotches, and mistakes, but leaves what you want. Harry knew that was one he was going to buy. Never-ending scrolls, tap your wand to cut off the length you want, another useful item. Self-spelling quills, never misspell a word again. Self-writing quills, just tell it the subject. Smart answer quills, just like the self-writing quill, but smarter. Grammar-checking quills, says what you mean without errors. Ultimate quills that did what all the others did. Sugar quills, snack while you write. Scroll storage boxes, and much, much more. Still, it didn't take all that long for the Gryffindor cohort to finish perusing the selections on hand. Although they did have to drag Hermione out, protesting she wasn't done yet. Well, George said Harry had decided that he would just start calling the first one to speak. George, there's only one place left to see. Not that we'll spend any time there really, said Fred. But you should all meet the proprietor. It's only proper. The twins leading, and Percy following to make sure they didn't lose any stragglers, they set off for the next destination, the 3 Broomsticks. This time, late afternoon, the lines were gone. Rosie, my love, called out George as they filed inside. Truth be told, Harry was starting to get tired. Except for lunch, they had spent the entire day on their feet. It was with great relief that the Gryffindors settled themselves into shining clean chairs around gleaming clean tables. The witch sauntered over, eyes sparkling and a genuine smile on her face. Harry wondered how she managed that. She had to have been running non-stop all day, just like the other shopkeepers. Most of them were starting to look a bit ragged around the edges. "We'll have 17 butterbeers please," Fred said. It was a lot like the Leaky Cauldron, only bigger, cleaner, nicer, better lit, rather welcoming. On second thought, Harry decided, it was like the Leaky Cauldron only in that it 4 walls, a roof, and served alcohol and lunches. On the other hoof, there's a reason for the Leaky Cauldron to look like that, Mr. Weasley had earnestly told them last month. It's the Muggles, don't you see? The ones with only a bit of magic, right? They can see the pub, but having them wander into Diagon Alley would cause a ruckus. So, instead, they see a dirty, dingy pub. Puts them right off, and they aren't inclined to investigate. And if they do go in, it looks like something they don't want and they leave. He gave a smile. And if they've already had a bit too much when they come in and want to stay, Tom gives them a subtle hint with his wand and off they go. It's all a part of keeping ourselves secret, right? They had duly nodded in understanding. But that made the 3 broomsticks all that more interesting to look at. It had a high ceiling, with 2 staircases, one at either end at the back. Each went up to a wide balcony on that side's wall that had tables overlooking the main floor. There was a connecting balcony, with tables, over the bar. The staircases also each had a corridor leading away from them farther into the building. There's meeting rooms and apartments down those, George had explained. Over the kitchen and storage rooms. Right nice I hear, added Fred. Toilets are under the stairs. Wizards on the left, Fred pointed. And witches on the right, George pointed. Their arms crossed each other. The next half-hour was spent in idle conversation and sipping their drinks while watching Rosmerta bounce around the room filling orders and talking to her customers. Well, watching the buxom Rosmerta was what Percy and the twins did. Harry and his friends spent their time comparing notes on what they had seen and bought and what they planned to buy from the catalogs they had picked up. They also made use of the facilities under the stairs. "Let's see if I understand this," the princess said. "You have the single most valuable artifact in magical Europe, maybe even in this world, in your possession." Dumbledore nodded sagely. "And you think that a dark wizard, working with a spirit Tom Riddle, is after it?" Dumbledore nodded again. "And instead of sealing it away somewhere where it can't be found or accessed, you are keeping it in this school." Her voice had risen a bit at the end. He nodded again, and said, "Hogwarts is the most secure and safest location in all of England, not even Gringotts is as secure." He smiled. She shook her head, as if to clear it, and continued, "Behind a bunch of obstacles designed to slow down this dark wizard." "That is correct. But not stop him or incapacitate him." "Yes, precisely. Because you want to capture him and get him to tell you where this Tom Riddle is?" He nodded. "Yes, you grasp my strategy perfectly." She, and the other Atlanteans, stared at him wide-eyed. She looked at the other 3 professors. They just stared back at her. She closed her eyes. Dumbledore noticed her lips moving slightly, as if she were counting. She took a breath and opened her eyes to look at him. "Are you out of your bucking mind?" she yelled. They all winced. She was standing stiffly, hands at her sides, fists clenched, feet about shoulder-width apart, her head slightly inclined in his direction. He looked at her nonplussed. He noticed that her heretofore nicely coiffed hair had several hairs sticking straight out. Another joined the rest as he watched. And her hair, as a whole, almost seemed to be floating. But that had to be his imagination. And her eyes were a bit wider than normal. "I assure, Princess Sparkle, that you know what you are doing," she finished, half hissing at him. He stopped, startled. "Just as you knew the students would not explore this corridor, or what lies behind this door. Just as you knew there was no way to get to the Chamber of Secrets." Just as you knew that I was exaggerating my estimate of the size of the basilisk. More hairs had popped out of hairdo. Chui, came the hesitant voice of Applejack. You might want to calm down a bit. Just as you knew there were no horrendously dangerous and hate-filled cursed items in the castle, continued the princess. Just as you knew it was perfectly safe to put on the cursed tiara. Twilight, said Rarity, stepping over and placing her hand on Princess Sparkle's arm. Based solely on your record over the last 24 hours, I would say you don't know as much as you think you do. Dumbledore drew himself up stiffly. Your Highness. Just on the spur of the moment, she said in a withering tone, what would you do if, while you're at a Wisengamot meeting, your dark wizard were to imperious a few students into walking into that room with the cerberus? And then, while he's occupied with eating them, sneaking past into the next obstacle with a few others? It's what Queen Chrysalis or King Sombra would have done. The other Atlanteans looked a little sick at the thought, but they all nodded. Would you even know he had entered this room? I think not, or you already would have known just how many students had taken a look at the cerberus. He would never do that. It would prematurely reveal his presence to the public and the ministry, Dumbledore replied carefully. It would be solid evidence, and the ministry would begin to fight back, to counter his plans before he could connect with his former supporters. Oh, she said. You have that in writing on a contract, I take it, she said, sarcasm dripping from her voice. I'm sure, that with only 1/64th of a soul, he is just as sane and calm as any other wizard or witch. Whom, I now suspect, have the self-control and common sense of a suicidal lemming. She rolled her eyes. And once past your Cerberus, he would work his way through to this artifact, wasting the lives of your students along the way. Why would he care if it took 10, 20, 30, or 40 lives for him to get to this artifact? Especially if they're all Muggle-born or half-bloods. In the past, he had no problems with his Death Eaters slaughtering those children and their parents for fun. King Sombra spent tens of thousands of lives creating and keeping his empire, Queen Chrysalis spent the lives of thousands of her own changelings trying to get what she wanted. Why should your Tom Riddle do any different, if this thing is so valuable? She stopped and took a deep breath, visibly calming herself. Right. Let's do this. Let's see just how hard it is to get to this thing. Her features hardened into determination as she turned to face the door. Dumbledore stared at her, his face a bit heated at her tirade. It had been a long time since anyone had berated him so thoroughly. And, he had to admit, with some justification. She was wrong in her conclusions, but still, there was a bit of truth hidden there. She flung open the door, not even noticing that it had been locked much more securely than a simple Alohomora could open, and stepped inside. Fluffy stood and started growling. She transformed into her Alicorn form, and Fluffy started to look confused. She nodded her head and music started playing in the room, a sweet lullaby of some kind. A lullaby Dumbledore had never heard. Come little children, he heard her softly sing. Fluffy stared at her for a moment, then sat down. Slowly he settled lower until he was lying down. The rest of them, the professors and the Atlanteans, watched quietly from the corridor behind the princess. Then he lowered his heads until all three were resting on the floor. His eyelids slowly began to droop, with first one head and then the next closing. It took less than 5 minutes before all three heads were snoring. The princess strode inside confidently. Her magic reached out to lift the sleeping dog and gently moved him to the back of the chamber. A blue shimmer seemed to come between them and the Cerberus. There, she said, that will prevent any noise from reaching him, as well keeping the music playing for the next hour or so. She turned and looked back at them. Well, come on. She walked over to the trap door. She stared down at it and sighed. They slowly followed her to the trap door. Fluttershy ran over to the Cerberus and began cooing at him and gently petting his heads. You didn't even hide the trapdoor, she said accusingly. At least you put a magical lock on that door, she pointed back at the corridor with a hoof, that will not open to a simple Alohomora. However, I'd have the trapdoor moved to a random location behind the cerberus each time someone opened the door to come in. Then I would block the walls, floor, and ceiling with a spell so that some pony like King Sombra, Queen Chrysalis, or myself couldn't just sink through the floor like this. Which she proceeded to do. Dumbledore exchanged surprised looks with Severus. Minerva said, she actually walked through the wall of the witches' toilets on the second floor to find the pipes that led to the basilisk. Filius nodded. A moment later, the princess was back, flapping her wings. Ugh, she said. That's awkward. She looked back at Dumbledore. Of course, my trapdoor would be a fake and lead to a trap from which he cannot escape. I'd make it a spirit trap, too, just to be safe. The real trapdoor I would place on the ceiling, which would certainly slow down most wizards. She glared at Dumbledore, and then looked down at the trapdoor. Well, at least this has an alert spell on it, she said drily. He nodded. She opened the trapdoor and jumped down. A moment later, a bright light shone from the open door. Her voice drifted up, okay, just jump down, I'll catch you. Dash just grinned and dove, tucking her wings close as she passed through the trapdoor. The others started jumping in. Fluttershy was the last to make the trip, gently settling beside the princess as the rest stared at the small tangle of vines slowly creeping their way closer. The purple pony stared at him, puzzled. Pomona's idea. It's Devil's Snare, it would entangle and trap anyone who jumped into it, Dumbledore explained. It fears fire. In another month it will fill this chamber. She sighed. And the first thing any wizard or witch would do in the dark is to light their wand. And then a fire when they see a plant trying to capture them. Which effectively means this is no obstacle to a wizard or witch. She shook her head sadly as they moved out of the room and into a short corridor. I would have placed light and heat-loving vines and made him crawl around in the dark looking for the doorway out while trying to evade the vines. And that door I would place partway to the ceiling. And put up an anti-flying charm. The next room they encountered had what they at first thought were birds, but Dash's keen eyesight quickly corrected that impression. There were keys with wings flying around in it. Hundreds of keys, flitting back and forth, swooping down and shooting up, swirling around in a great flock of glittering metal. Filius' contribution, the headmaster said quietly. You must catch the key to open the door. She sighed again, and walked across the room to the door, stopped a moment, then walked through the door. Dumbledore winced as she opened the door from the other side. They followed her across, with Dash detouring into chasing the keys for a moment. Come on Dash, said Applejack, or you'll get left behind. Dash squawked and dove through door as Applejack was closing it, a mass of keys chasing her. The two tumbled into Pinkie Pie who was trailing the others as the keys thudded into the door behind them. A short argument erupted over whose fault it was that they ended up in a pile. Pinkie Pie just giggled throughout it. The chess set caught their attention, next. And this is Minerva's work. A rather excellent set of transfigurations. Oh, neat, cried Pinkie Pie and charged out onto the board and started climbing the pieces. They started moving the moment she touched them. The knights' horses began to hoof at the squares they stood upon, the kings and queens turned as if to look at them, as did the bishops. Rainbow Dash flew over it to the other door and waited for them. They started across the chessboard to join Dash. The chess pieces ominously began to move towards them, lifting their weapons threateningly. The princess just shook her head, and frowned. A blast of light came from her horn and swept across the board, smashing everything and pushing the debris to one side. Pinkie Pie shook her head beside Dumbledore. They weren't nearly as much fun as I thought they would be. As the pieces slowly reformed, they walked into the short passageway to the next room. Oh, my word. What is that smell? Asked Rarity holding her hand over her nose. Pinkie Pie was wearing a Muggle World War II gas mask, once more in pink camouflage. And looking blandly at the rest of them staring at her. It's a troll, explained Dumbledore, provided by Quiniris. Twilight didn't even slow down. A purple bubble shimmered around the troll that had been napping against the wall beside the other door. They dimly heard its roars and thumps as it tried in vain to break out of its temporary prison. The next room had a table with potion bottles on it. Severus came up with this, Dumbledore said. Most wizards are terrible at logic puzzles. The flames covering the two doors were a bit startling, but, again, the princess didn't slow down as she once more walked through the wall and around the flames covering the door, demonstrating how useless that particular challenge was. She came back out on the other side of the door a moment later. She walked over to the potion vials and studied the note on the table, then the vials. After a moment she nodded. This one should have the correct potion. Then she asked hopefully, unless you were extremely clever and made all the potions instant sleeping potions. Severus slowly shook his head, and then said, as you have already demonstrated, you could avoid the puzzle completely. He took out his wand and pointed it at the far wall. The black flames went out. They walked straight into the next room. There was no passageway this time. She turned to the headmaster. So, if you were in one of the monthly meetings of the Wizengamot, as chief warlock, could you have gotten here before I made it here? She raised an eyebrow inquisitively. Dumbledore had to admit it, no, I'm afraid not. I expected it to take anyone at least an hour, perhaps longer, to make it through all the obstacles. He looked at the floor. While her walking through walls was completely unexpected, her solutions to the chess game and the troll were blindingly obvious, now. And, she had been correct in her evaluation of Pomona's devil's snare, an extremely simple trap, one he could now see even a first year would have figured out without difficulty. Only Filius Quirum and Severus Potion's puzzle would have taken a knowledgeable wizard any real time to solve. Then, I would assume your dark wizard could also do it as fast as I did. She looked around. So, where is the artifact? And what is the obstacle? If it's like the others, it will take only a few moments to bypass it, as well. Dumbledore looked around, too. Alas, he said, the artifact is not in here. Not here? Twilight said astonished. Yes, She grinned, suddenly happy. That's brilliant. She started trotting in place. He goes through all those obstacles, no matter how fast, and there's no artifact here. She spun in place. Yes. Finally. She started to look earnestly around the room, her forehead furrowed in concentration. So, where's the trap? She gasped. Is it the room? She started casting a few spells. No, Princess Sparkle said, after a few moments, puzzled. The walls in this chamber have no spells to contain anything. She turned slowly. Hogwarts anti-apparition spells and anti-portkey spells are up. And there's no flu. So, he can't escape the room magically. But what's to prevent him from simply walking back out once he realizes the thing he wants isn't here? Dumbledore shifted uncomfortably. I haven't placed the final obstacle, actually. Ah, she said, still happy. You're still working on that. She nodded, then paused a moment, one hoof in the air, thinking. As long as he knows it is inaccessible, he'll wait to do anything. Is that what you hope? He smiled. Yes, that is essentially correct. He won't make a move until he knows the item has been placed behind the final obstacle. To move before then would end in catastrophe, for him. She frowned again. And how will he know that? You can't exactly take out an ad in the Daily Prophet, now, can you? Dumbledore looked at her for a moment, thinking. It's behind a Fidelius charm, at the moment. You do know what that is, correct? She nodded, listening attentively while Dash drifted around the room like a lost blue butterfly. That's why I haven't named the artifact. As the secret keeper, if I told you I had the artifact, then I would be disclosing the secret to all of you. Hence, my circumspect descriptions of the item. However, he knows about the artifact, and that he used to know where it was, but now he doesn't. When I cancel the Fidelius, he'll remember it is here. All he remembers right now is that the artifact is that I have hidden it, and that I am working on a set of traps that will lead to it. He's waiting until I am finished. He has waited 10 years, what's a few more months? She nodded. That makes sense. She worried her lower lip with her teeth. So, he knows what the item is, and that it used to be at Gringotts. He knows you have it, but because of the Fidelius, he can't force you to give up the secret. He also knows that you are preparing a series of obstacles that will lead to it, and that therefore you will be removing it from its secret place at some point in time. But he doesn't dare act early, because you might simply leave the item hidden and fort up Hogwarts to prevent him from using any students as hostages. Yes, said Dumbledore happily, you've got it. Applejack looked at them and said, honey, all I'm getting is a headache. Dash snickered from overhead, I stopped listening when Tree said it was brilliant. Pinkie Pie was standing on one of the walls looking at one of the torches. Rarity just shook her head. Castor leaned back in his chair. So, based on what you've said, I think we should first take a look at Beretta Gallery to give you an idea of what we're talking about. They offer both pistols and rifles. Then we should go to the army training facility at Bassingbourn, tomorrow, where we can run you through the basic safety training course and you can get familiar with the weapons. He took a deep breath. I do have to say, though, that it is highly unlikely that you will ever need such a weapon. In England, only about 7% of all the police officers have even received training in handling firearms, be it pistol, rifle, or shotgun. And, from personal experience since I became an officer, I can honestly say I have never needed a firearm of any sort, nor ever felt the longing to have one with me. Nor have any of the officers I know. And the number of people killed with a gun last year were less than 11% of all homicides in England, just 61 people. Out of over 150,000 crimes. And 50 million plus people. To tell the truth, almost twice as many people died from drowning while swimming than from guns. That being said, I do see why you might want some familiarity with these weapons. For you, it's a new and unknown risk factor. Doing this will give you an understanding of their uses and limitations. Something that a movie, where the directors use artistic license to make things appear more dramatic, can't do. He looked at the two women. Are either of you a unicorn? Agent Heartstrings nodded. I am. Can you stop things thrown at you? The two exchanged puzzled looks. I mean, well, for example, if someone threw a rock at you and you couldn't dodge it, what would you do? Lyra shrugged, put up a shield spell. Ah. So, such a thing exists. Yes. Can you extend it to cover something else, like, he looked around the room. Like put a shield over that window from where you are sitting? She frowned. Yes, but the farther away it is the harder it is to do. Good, then when we are at the range tomorrow, we can test your shield against gunfire. I'm sure you would like to know if such a thing would work should you ever get in a situation where someone was shooting at you. They both nodded. He looked at his watch. Well, we missed lunchtime. How about we get something to eat, and then drop by the Beretta Gallery? Oh. That sounds wonderful, said Agent Drops. I wonder what desserts they'll have. And I can practice using these, Agent Heartstrings said, holding up her hands and wriggling her fingers, staring at them with an eager expression. And I can put in a call to my office so they can warn the shooting range to expect us tomorrow. Princess Sparkle looked around the room pensively. A scroll and quill flew out of her saddlebags and started making notes. Pinkie Pie, she said, would you please carve these into the corners of the walls, floor, and ceiling? They will seal the room to anything trying to magically cross them. Okie dokie Loki. Pinkie Pie said cheerfully, snatching the list and running off to a far corner. The runes will take a few days to get to full power. When Pinkie finishes, I'll give them a partial charge to start. Done. Pinkie said, handing the list back to the purple alicorn. They all jumped and stared at her. The princess opened her mouth to say something, but stopped, and simply said, thank you, Pinkie. She looked at the wizards and witch, who were staring at Pinkie dumbfounded. Don't even try to figure it out. One of the worst days of my life was trying to figure Pinkie Pie out. Pinkie grinned happily. Dumbledore felt a powerful surge around them as the princess frowned and her horn glowed ever so lightly. They went back out to the next room. Twilight studied the door carefully, then drew some runes on it with her hoof. The door shimmered and disappeared, now looking just like the rest of the wall behind it. She looked back at Severus. He'll not get a clue to where the door is when he comes in. Make those black flames cover the entire wall. She handed the scroll to Pinkie, again. Could you do the walls, ceiling, and floor, again? She walked to the table of potions. I still think you should make all these sleeping potions. She sighed and headed to the door to the room with the troll, pausing only to send out a pulse of magic when Pinkie Pie once more declared she was done. The small corridor between the rooms was quickly protected, as well. There would be no sneaking into the spaces between the obstacles and trying to skip ahead. The doors were protected from magical attack and destruction, too. Or at least from any attack that wouldn't also destroy a good portion of the rooms, and possibly the caster. The troll room received the same treatment, except she had Pinkie draw some runes on the bottom of the troll's feet while she held the troll still. Those runes make the troll almost impervious to magic as long as he is in this room. She was clearly struggling to hold the magic-resistant troll still as Pinkie finished the last rune. Hurry, she called as they darted through the door, closing it only moments before the troll slammed into it. In Minerva's room, after reinforcing the walls, she said to the professor, make the chess pieces impervious to outside magical movement and blasts. And put up anti-flying charms. Make him work to get across the room. Maybe even give the bishops and knights crossbows as well as spears so they don't have to get close to attack anyone trying to sneak across the board. Then came the next room. She stared at the flying keys while Pinkie Pie darted around. She sighed. I hope this doesn't work, she said. She concentrated and a bright light lit the room. A few seconds later, every key in the room was at her feet. Except for one lone key flitting about. She looked at Filius. I summoned every key that would respond, reasoning you would put the anti-summoning charm only on the one key that opened the door. Filius nodded stoically. Perhaps leave him the pieces of the brooms, so he has to assemble a broom to catch the keys. And the keys could attack him while he is occupied in doing that. In the vine's room, she walked over and stared at the small plant. She took a deep breath and a glow surrounded both her and the vines. She remained unmoving for several moments, then staggered back. She took a few deep breaths, then looked up at the ceiling. She nodded to herself and pulled out another scroll and made some notes on it. Dash. Would you draw these runes on each surface at the corners of the room? Yes. Finally. Something to do. I was falling asleep here. She grabbed the scroll and shot up to the ceiling. Twilight turned to Pinkie, and would you carve the ceiling runes in the corners, as you did in the other rooms? Oh, boy, she said enthusiastically, a race. She darted to the first corner so fast she was a blur. Princess Sparkle turned to Dumbledore. I changed the vines so that now they seek magic, but avoid the sun. Dumbledore exchanged astonished looks with his friends. She had magically altered the vines in under a minute. He was unaware of any spells that could do that without a great deal of time and effort as in months or years of work. Pomona would be beside herself when she heard about this. Oh, and their fruit now tastes like cherries and is rich in vitamin C and D, might as well make the silly things useful for something. Cherry chimichangas are the best. Pinkie Pie declared from behind them. Dumbledore heard a faint rustling and looked around to see what was making the noise. The vines were reaching out towards him, and the others, in spite of the flames coming from their wands. He thought a moment, and the light from his wand changed from that of a bright candle to match that of the sun. The vines twisted and turned, but came no closer. A few minutes later, they were all once more standing beside the sleeping Fluffy. Pinkie was flitting about, once more doing a job impossibly fast, with Dash excitedly racing her along the ceiling. This room had far more corners than the others did. "Come along, Fluttershy," the princess called out as they headed back into the corridor. Fluttershy, naturally, was petting the Cerberus as he slept. Outside in the corridor, the princess turned to Dumbledore. "I really don't like the presence of either this artifact or this dark wizard you think is going to try to get it. Do you know who that wizard is?" "Alas, no princess, I do not. I have suspicions, but no real evidence. I believe he is currently staying in Hogsmeade, hiding. I think that he will try to slip into Hogwarts sometime soon, definitely when I remove the Fidelius." Twilight stared up at the ceiling in exasperation. "And we just sent the entire student population into Hogsmeade where he could snatch a student and use Polyjuice to sneak into the castle. And once in the dorm, he could imperious his dormmates to ignore whatever he does." She sighed. "Except," Dumbledore said, "he knows that the item he wants is still unavailable. It would benefit him nothing to do anything now. The risks involved in keeping up the charade long enough for me to finish the traps and remove the Fidelius outweigh the gain he might get from being a student inside Hogwarts the entire time before I do so. I should remove Harry and the Fillies, immediately." She paused a moment, worrying her lower lip. Dumbledore kept his expression bland, smiling slightly. From what he had seen today, if she wanted to take Harry with her, there was bloody little he could do to prevent it. However, this wizard is not yet in Hogwarts and the artifact, in itself, is innocuous. Knowing he cannot get the artifact until you remove the Fidelius, he should be patient. And as long as he is outside of Hogwarts, the students are safe. She paused. Again. "I will allow them to remain here until you either suspect or decide that this dark wizard has somehow made his way into Hogwarts. At that point, I will remove Harry and the Fillies until this wizard is dealt with." "That seems reasonable. As long as the wizard thinks I am working to finish the obstacles, he will remain patient." She stared at him, frowning. "Unless he is stupid, he knows you're building a trap for him. After all, if you merely wanted to keep it hidden, you would never remove the Fidelius." "Yes, that is quite true. However, if he thought I was going to permanently leave it hidden away, then he would set up a hostage situation where I would have to choose between keeping the secret or letting students die." He smiled condescendingly. "That's why Gringotts was such a good hiding place for so long. They could not be blackmailed by such tactics into giving up the artifact. They wouldn't care how many died, either wizards or goblins, the vault would remain closed." She stared at him a moment. "Why didn't this Flammel cast the Fidelius on the item in the vault?" Dumbledore shrugged. "I'm sure Gringotts wouldn't have allowed him to perform that magic." She rolled her eyes. "Goblin, my friend, I have something in this chest," she held her hands about shoulder width apart, "that has a Fidelius cast on it so that no one knows I have it or where it is. Please put it in one of your most secure vaults." Dumbledore stared at her, then said, "I don't know why he didn't do that." The princess sighed and looked down briefly, shaking her head. Dumbledore said, "No matter. Now that it had been moved, the wizard had to figure another way to the artifact. He knew that one of my staff had just removed item and probably brought it here. My actions here, regarding the obstacles here in Hogwarts, assured him that I had, indeed, secured the item. He thinks he can easily beat my obstacles and acquire the artifact without revealing that Voldemort is trying to return to life. Thus, he is patient." She gave him a dark look. "And, as I demonstrated, he was more than correct about the obstacles, right?" Dumbledore cleared his throat. "Yes, quite so." He shifted slightly, embarrassed. "However, I do not believe he has mastered the spell for walking through walls. I certainly have never heard of such a spell, myself. And your runes have rendered that moot, now, anyway." She snorted and turned back to the door, now closed and several yards behind them. Her horn glowed for a moment. "There. I have placed an age line across this end of the corridor. No one under the age of 21 can pass it to even get to the door and unlock it to see Fluffy. She cut her eyes over to look at Dumbledore. I wonder why you never thought to use it. It seems like such an easy answer to keeping the students out. He felt his face burn. Sometimes it takes an outsider to spot the obvious. Yes. Indeed, she said. I have had to learn that lesson myself. And I still occasionally forget. She looked at her friends with a smile. Rainbow Dash was smiling back and buffing a hoof on her chest smugly. The others merely returned her smile. Yes, the princess murmured, friends are a great help. She sighed and looked back at the wizards and witch. And then there are the windows. She frowned. With the easy availability of flying on broomsticks, I imagine some students might try to sneak in that way. Or maybe even your bad wizard might do that. So, maybe you should spell the windows to not open, be unbreakable, and give you an alarm. And to block anyone from looking in either. Dumbledore nodded. Oh yes, that was certainly a possibility. Voldemort's minion could bypass his first alarm simply by opening a window. She watched him, then added, perhaps you should consult with others a bit more frequently. Yes, mayhaps I shall. He paused a moment, thinking. Well, he said briskly, I believe we should make our way to the gates. Skiffy. Skiffy be here, came the immediate response. Would you inform the professors that the gates will be opening soon and to begin sending the students back to Hogwarts? Dinner will take place in the Great Hall, at the same time as usual, which will be less than an hour, I believe. And tell the other house elves that they may return as soon as the wizards or witches they are helping no longer need their assistance. And tell Hagrid to wait until I am there before opening the gates. The house elf didn't even reply, he just disappeared. Speaking of which, the princess said, in view of the possibility the bad wizard might be a bit more desperate than you think, every student should be checked for any liquids they might be carrying, and what those liquids are. We wouldn't want anyone to smuggle in a quantity of polyjuice while under an Imperius. She frowned. Is there a spell to detect when someone is under the Imperius? We should do that, as well. He cocked his head slightly sideways. For polyjuice, indirectly, yes. I will stand at the gates myself and do so. A simple spell will reveal any liquids. For the Imperius, no one has devised such a spell, yet. The furrow in her brow grew deeper, and she worried her lower lip with her teeth. Can you cast it on me? I want to see what it does. A scroll and quill flew from her saddlebags. The quill started taking notes. The wizards exchanged looks. It is normally a forbidden curse, Dumbledore said. He stood a moment, thinking. But I do have many witnesses that you requested it. He glanced around at them smiling. I will cast a weak version. He lifted his wand and said, Imperius. She looked at him curiously. Could you cast it on Fluttershy? Fluttershy squeaked and hid behind Rainbow Dash. The princess smiled. Don't worry, Fluttershy, I don't know anyone who has a stronger will than you. Mumbling quietly, the sonorous had finally worn off, the shy pink-haired witch slowly stepped back into view. Dumbledore again cast the spell. The purple alicorn stared for several moments, then nodded slowly. Would you give her a command? He nodded, Miss Fluttershy, pat your head with one hand while rubbing your stomach with the other. She tilted her head and said, why would I want to do that? Twilight nodded again. Fluttershy. I want you to do what he says, next time. Don't fight the spell. I want to see it in action, so don't question it, please. Uncertainly, Fluttershy nodded. Dumbledore again cast the spell and issued his instructions, then watched as the witch did as he had ordered. Would you cancel the spell, Headmaster? Finite incantatem. The quill continued to scribble for several moments until the princess smiled. Can we try it once more, Headmaster? Fluttershy had barely started patting her head when the princess' horn glowed purple, and Fluttershy glowed bright green. Fluttershy stopped what she was doing with a puzzled expression. What happened? Princess Sparkle turned to Dumbledore and had a sheet of paper fly over to him. Here's a spell that turns anyone under the Imperius a bright green color. If the cast spell is stronger than the spell used for the Imperius, it cancels it. Dumbledore and the professors stared at her in shock. She had just created a spell from scratch. Still smiling, she said, "We will join you at the gates. And you should make yourself invisible. No one will suspect us as we are taking the opportunity to greet our families. You being in sight would be a clear sign that something was suspected." They headed for the castle doors, Dumbledore intently studying the spell described on the paper. Just as they reached front doors, Dumbledore looked up from the paper. "As we were too busy to have lunch," he said addressing the Atlanteans, "I believe I would be remiss in not inviting you all to join us for our evening repast." The 6 women exchanged looks and it was obvious they were of the same mind. "Yes, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore," said Princess Sparkle, "I think I can say we would be delighted to join you." "Oh, I can hardly wait to see Sweetie Belle," declared Rarity, "it seems like forever since I saw her last week." "I know the feelin', honey," Applejack said. "The house just feels empty without Apple Bloom's hooves charging up and down the stairs. And I want to see if Scoots has tried any of my tricks, yet. She's been telling me about those Quidditch games, here. I wouldn't mind catching one if I can. There should be some time after dinner." His eyes were sparkling, again, he knew. "I'm sure one of the other teams could be persuaded into a match against the Pegasi team." He handed the paper to Phileas. The other 2 professors looked over his shoulder at the paper. Dash took off out the doors in a rainbow-colored streak. "By the way, Princess Sparkle," Dumbledore said as they descended the steps outside. "The books you loaned to Harry? I would appreciate it if you would not do so in the future without first letting me take a look at the book you're sending. Some of the spells in this book," he pulled it out of his pocket and unshrank it, "spells for ghosts, if they were real, are too advanced for most students here at Hogwarts. And while you undoubtedly thought them harmless, given that there are no ghosts where you came from," he frowned slightly at that thought, "why didn't they have ghosts in Atlantis? Here in England many of the spells are considered dangerous and restricted. We are very lucky that the spell they worked on Miss Warren was not a proscribed one that would have landed them in deep trouble." He sighed, "As it is, I had to spend a considerable amount of time over the last 2 days soothing worried parents, and the ministry, telling them that your 3 charges were not attempting forbidden magics and that they didn't constitute a threat to the rest of Hogwarts." The princess looked abashed and embarrassed. "Yes, I am sorry about that. I was just so excited to hear that there were ghosts here that I didn't consider what that might mean. Do you mind if I read this book, and the others you sent them? I would very much like to make them available to the other students, or acquire copies for our library, if they are benign enough." She looked at him brightly. "Oh, no, go right ahead. In fact, I'll tell the girls to give you the books for your library when they are finished with them. They are extra copies, after all." He nodded. "Thank you very much for your generosity, Princess Sparkle. I look forward to reading the other books. This, though, will have to reside in the library's restricted section until I can convince the ministry to allow its general circulation, dealing as it does with returning a ghost to life." They walked in silence for a moment. "I do have one other question about this book, if you don't mind." He held up the book, before shrinking and stowing it once more in his pocket. She looked at him inquisitively. "Do all of your books come with a sap-repelling spell on them?" So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 26. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.